Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to uncover a hidden, forensic history that is going to completely change how you view the ancient world. You know, we usually think of history as this grand series of epic battles, brilliant generals, and profound philosophies. But today we're looking at a microscopic convergence of botany and chemistry that literally hijacked the course of human events.
So let's dive right into this bizarre ancient crime scene by asking a question that turns textbook history totally upside down. What if the real threat to the world's most powerful empires wasn't invading armies at all? What if it was actually a highly addictive, civilization-ending substance disguised as a luxury incense? Just imagine it. The absolute greatest superpowers of the ancient world completely destroyed by a single designer drug.
We've all heard of the romanticized Silk Road, right? That beautiful ribbon of gold and gossamer bringing luminous Han silk and Indian black pepper to Rome, sparking all this amazing cultural exchange and technological progress. But the archaeological record hides a much, much darker secret in its strata. Because beneath those harmless bales of cinnamon lay the shadow Silk Road. This was a clandestine network dealing in a dark commerce, trading a substance so potent and so biologically destructive that it brought three distinct superpowers straight to their knees.
So what exactly was this stuff? Well, it was known as Ignis Deorum, or the fire of the gods in Rome, and Zhenhua, or the true fire in Han China. And let me tell you, this was not your average culinary spice. Picture a shimmering crimson powder that smells sharply of ozone, crushed pine, and sweet rot. It was sold under the guise of an exotic incense or the ultimate medicinal elixir, but it was actually a highly complex, forbidden botanical and mineral admixture. Basically, the ancient world's most devastating designer drug.
The pharmacology behind this powder is just terrifying. This wasn't just some single plant they found. It was a dark alchemical triumph combining three extreme ingredients. First, from the freezing slopes of the Hindu Kush Mountains, they used a highly specific, now extinct strain of Ephedra, packed with massive concentrations of ephedrine. Second, they ground up the seeds of a hybridized Datura plant loaded with scopolamine, which effortlessly crosses the blood-brain barrier. And third, to give it that signature crimson hue, they took Cinnabar from the deep veins of the Altai Mountains. By grinding this mercury sulfide with acidic citrus oils and fat-rich Himalayan musk, these ancient smugglers accidentally created highly bioavailable methyl mercury.
Now, what did this toxic cocktail actually do to the human brain? Let's break down the toxidrome, or the symptom profile. The moment it was ingested or inhaled, the ephedrine delivered a sudden rush of titanic energy, just violently activating the nervous system. At the same exact time, carefully microdosed scopolamine stripped away all fear and anxiety, replacing them with this euphoric grandiosity and a really profound susceptibility to suggestion. To an ancient emperor, this felt like transcendent spiritual elevation, like a literal communion with the gods. But over the months and years, the mercury slowly accumulated. Heavy metal poisoning dismantles the brain from the inside out, triggering extreme paranoia, emotional lability, and severe schizophrenic psychosis. It literally made rulers feel immortal for a year, only to transform them into paranoid, homicidal lunatics the next.
Behind this designer drug was an elite cartel of East Iranian Sogdian merchants. Operating out of opulent oasis cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, right on the edge of the deadly Taklamakan desert, they were the ultimate middleman. Since early wiser administrators realized how destructive this drug was and outlawed it, the Sogdians had to get creative. They concealed the crimson powder in hard discs hidden in the false bottoms of amphorae, burying them under really pungent saffron or cumin just to mask the drug's metallic tang. Sometimes they even packed it inside massive hollowed-out blocks of Central Asian jade. I mean, it was an incredibly sophisticated operation.
And because of its intense addictive properties, the economics of this illicit trade were absolutely staggering. Demand among the ancient elite was completely inelastic. By the time this powder made its way from the Kunlun Mountains, across shifting desert dunes, and finally into the Mediterranean, its price had marked up by a factor of 10,000. That made the red powder worth literally 20 times its weight in gold.
This wasn't just a pricey habit for the rich either. It was macroeconomically devastating. The Roman chronicler Pliny the Elder famously complained about this massive drain of Roman coins to the east, estimating that a mind-boggling 100 million sesterces were lost annually. Traditional history usually blames this trade deficit on things like silk and black pepper. but modern economic modeling suggests regular culinary spices simply couldn't account for such a rapid, total depletion of the imperial treasury. The desperate addiction of Rome's patrician class to the Ignis Deorum was silently bleeding the Roman Empire dry.
Let's look at our very first crime scene, the Han Dynasty in the East. Back in the mid-2nd century CE, the Han court was completely obsessed with the concept of immortality. The drug was introduced to the imperial court under the guise of an ultimate elixir, and Emperor Ling became heavily addicted. He showed all the classic signs of epitrine-induced mania. To cool the immense heat generated by the epitrine in his system, he'd literally wander the palace grounds at night in freezing temperatures, barking orders at imaginary enemies. Detached from reality by the scopolamine, he began auctioning off state offices to the highest bidder, actually selling parts of his own government just to fund his extravagant lifestyle and his unending supply of the red powder.
Then came the paranoia. The bioaccumulating mercury caused Emperor Ling to suspect his own educated generals, prompting him to hand absolute power to a corrupt faction of court eunuchs known as the 10 Attendants. All this administrative chaos and economic devastation lit the spark of the massive Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 CE. Within just 5 years, the central authority collapsed entirely. By 189 CE, the warlord Dongzhou slaughtered those eunuchs and burned the capital to the ground, fracturing the unified empire into the warring Three Kingdoms. The Han Dragon wasn't slain by an invading army. It was poisoned from within by a handful of shimmering crimson dust.
While the Han dynasty was burning, the supply lines simply pivoted west toward the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in modern-day Iran and Iraq. Over there, the aristocracy consumed the Ignis Deorum by dissolving it into heavily spiced, fermented pomegranate wine. The alcohol essentially acted as a solvent, accelerating the onset of the drug's euphoric effects. It became the ultimate status symbol for their multi-day banquets. But, just like we saw in China, mercury-induced paranoia soon completely shattered the fragile feudal alliances that held the Parthian state together. Regional leaders, their minds totally warped by chronic ephedrine stimulation and heavy metal toxicity, turned on one another, igniting localized civil wars.
The endgame of that chronic mercury poisoning is perfectly captured by contemporary accounts from the Sassanids. When the highly organized Sassanid Persians rose up in rebellion, they didn't face the terrifying Parthian military machine of the past. No, they faced a delirious, fractured aristocracy. They described the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, as a man of shaking hands and wild, unblinking eyes. He was utterly defeated in 224 CE. Think about that. A 400-year-old empire, entirely hollowed out by the very trade route it desperately tried to control.
And that brings us to our final victim, the Roman Empire. The drug arrived right during the height of the Pax Romana. Take a look at Emperor Commodus, who's often remembered as the megalomaniacal tyrant who ended Rome's golden age. His infamous descent into madness matches the exact toxic symptoms of the red powder. Exhibiting extreme hyperactivity and a total loss of impulse control, Commodus famously fought as a gladiator in the Colosseum, fueled by the stimulant's illusion of Herculean strength. The scopolamine and mercury perfectly explain his psychological break. He hallucinated he was the reincarnation of Hercules, he renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, and he violently executed his closest advisors out of severe paranoia.
The cascading effects were nothing short of apocalyptic. You see, chronic ephedrine abuse really taxes the cardiovascular system and causes massive immunosuppression. So, when the Antonine Plague swept through, the wealthy patrician elite died in shockingly high numbers, their immune systems absolutely battered by adrenal fatigue and heavy metal toxicity. To afford the drug, desperate emperors debased the Roman denarius from 90% silver down to less than 5%, which triggered massive hyperinflation. You even had Emperor Elagabalus smothering his dinner guests in tons of rose petals, a completely bizarre behavior that aligns flawlessly with the drug's hallucinogenic delirium. This toxic cocktail of hyperinflation, plague, and crazed emperors triggered the devastating 50-year crisis of the 3rd century.
Now, you're probably wondering, if this drug literally altered the course of human events, why isn't it in our history books today? Well, the answer is this fascinating convergence of ecology and geopolitics. In a truly ironic twist, the limitless wealth of these three empires drove demand so unbelievably high that the Sogdian smugglers completely overharvested the highly specific strains of Ephedra and Datura in the remote Kunlun and Hindu Kush mountains. They literally consumed these plants to absolute extinction. On top of that, surviving empires like the Sassanids strictly banned the substance, and the Roman economy was way too ruined to afford it anyway. The source material just vanished, and the dark alchemical recipe of the Zenhua was lost to the desert sands forever.
Please like and subscribe.